All right, I'll give you somewhere between the preacher version that won't quit and the politician that will answer questions. How about that? Does that work? Thank you all for allowing us to bring 3 of our kids. We've got 4, and my wife Natalie is down in Orlando right now with our oldest doing competition cheer, which is where seemingly all of our weekends and half of my paycheck goes. Nora was down there last week. Nora, where were you last week? Were you Tampa for the same thing? So they can't do it on one weekend and let you just book 2 hotel nights and get everybody. It's like multiple weekends, and so it is a racket. If I lose the lieutenant governor's race, I'm going to open a competition cheerleading company, and it will be. I've had some successes in my life. That would be the largest success I think that I've had. Y'all, my name is Greg Dolezal, and Brenda's exactly right. I'm running for lieutenant governor. It is a crowded field. There's 7 good men and women running on the Republican side, and I would hope that by the end of this, my goal is to help you understand my worldview, because I think that if you can understand someone's worldview, you can really understand how they're going to legislate. And I think that one of the things, frankly, that sets me apart is I can articulate a worldview, because I've thought about it. And it certainly is a different worldview than Nabila Islam Parks has on the other side of the aisle, somebody that's running for lieutenant governor, or that Josh McLaurin has, somebody who, frankly, is probably more intelligent than me, but far more liberal than me as well. And so you have to have both, right? You've got to have a principled worldview, a backbone to stand up for, and then ultimately an ability to lead. My background, you can see that my kids are real. Some people think that this stuff's AI these days. But I've been starting companies for the last 20 plus years. And I've started and sold companies and currently own a company that across North Georgia employ about 500 people. And that is a differentiating factor for me and some of my friends that are in this race. I have not been in government my whole life. I've been in government for less than 7.5 years. And I did it, it was a compelled interest, and I'll get to that in a second. But I do think that there's a unique place for business owners in state government. We tend to attract a lot of lawyers. We tend to attract, frankly, a lot of people that are in their golden years. But it's not often that we get entrepreneurs in the prime of their career to enter state government, because it's hard. Because most people can't walk away from their job for 3 or 4 months, right? So if you're a school teacher, if you're a firefighter, if you're working for a Fortune 500 company, you can't say, hey, y'all, peace out. I'm leaving January 12th. I'll see you again on March 30th. It doesn't work. I've been blessed and been able to do that. I spent a decade of my life right before doing this as a tour manager for a guy named Chris Tomlin. If any of y'all were in church this morning, you probably sang some of Chris's songs. And so Chris and I lived on a tour bus together for 10 years. And I came off the road in 2016. And this is in the midst of doing a bunch of other entrepreneurial things and making babies. But Nora was about to be born. And we decided that touring was a young man's game, and B, not a father's game. And so I came off the road. And we began to pray about what was next. And we decided to run for office. So I went out and knocked on 10,000 doors in my community. And a month before I was elected, Neva was born. And I told the constituents and my would-be voters in Forsyth County that I thought that we were in a fight to save America. And quite frankly, this is 2018, and they kind of looked at me like I had a horn growing out of my head, because in 2018, Republicans did not feel like we were in a fight to save America. President Trump was in his first term. He was 1.5 years in at that point in time, and we felt pretty good. But I could sense amongst my generation that my generation and younger was not connecting with the American dream. And they believed that the American dream was something that their grandparents believed. And the reality is that America is not just a country, but it's an idea. And if you study really what happened 250 years ago this year, coming out of the Enlightenment period, coming out of the Great Awakening in America, so 2 things are happening simultaneously. You're having a philosophical revolution where you have Montesquieu, Locke, and a number of other thinkers beginning to reframe the ideas around government. And then here in America in the early 1700s, you begin to have a spiritual awakening. And it was the children of the people that lived through the spiritual awakening in America that wrote the Declaration of Independence. And they encapsulated an idea that still to this day is uniquely American. I'm going to recite it for you. And I want you to think of this through the lens of America being an idea. You've heard it, but reframe it in your mind through that lens. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Did you catch the idea? The idea is that rights don't come from a king, rights don't come from government, rights don't come from man, but rights come from God. And the American Declaration of Independence and ultimately our Constitution was the first governing document in human history that recognized that reality. You see, today we take that for granted, but that was a very revolutionary idea. If you read John Locke's 2 treatises of government, the first treatise was deconstructing this idea called the divine right of kings. What the entire Western world thought before that was that literally the kings came from the direct lineage of Adam, and they had a divine right from God to rule over the people. And the American Constitution, Declaration of Independence said, no, that's not the way that it works. The rights don't come from a king, they come from God. And then the next sentence of the Declaration, I think it's to my job description. I think the most important question you could ask Paul or myself or anybody else that ever stands here is, what do you believe is the role of government? Because I believe that if someone frames for you what they believe the role of government is, you can predict with really, really good accuracy how they're going to govern. The beauty of it is that I don't need to make it up. Because right after we hold these truths to be self-evident, a line that all of us could quote is probably a line that none of us can quote. But it does get to the role of government. It says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their power from the consent of the governed. The second half of that is that uniquely American idea again, deriving their power from the consent of the governed. We are the boss. We don't exist for government. Government exists for us. But why? To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. What is the role of government? It's to secure your rights. It's the only reason it exists. It doesn't exist to feed you. It doesn't exist to clothe you. It doesn't exist to meddle in your health care. It doesn't exist to come into your paycheck and take what they want and give you what's left over. Government's job is to secure your rights. And frankly, hardly any Democrat believes that, and far too few Republicans understand that being the role of government. So 8 years ago, I told people that that's what I was going to do, and that's what I did. Very first bill that I wrote was a bill to ban COVID-19 vaccine passports in the state of Georgia. Governor Kemp signed it, because you have the right to determine what goes in your own body, not the government. Second bill that I wrote, the Georgia Promise Scholarship Act, because parents, not bureaucrats, should be able to determine the educational outcome for their children. And what the Promise Scholarship does, it's a school choice bill. It lets the money follow the child to an educational opportunity of the parent's choice. I believe that school choice is the civil rights era of my generation, because your zip code should not determine your outcome in life, and far too often that is the case still in America. Third bill that I passed came out of something I saw happening in my child's school system, and I wrote a bill to ban DEI mandates in K through 12 public education. Because DEI is neo-Marxism by another name, it is collectivism by another name, and it needs to be rooted out, and we cannot be teaching the next generation to hate free market capitalism, hate the bodies in which they were born, hate their families, and ultimately to hate America. But that is the trend line in far too many public education classrooms, certainly in higher education. And the last bill I wrote was last year, was the Riley-Gaines Act, because I believe that men have zero place in women's sports or in their locker rooms. And I was happy for Governor Kemp to sign that. So where do I think that we're at? I think that we're in a moment in history that is really, really interesting. Because while 8 years ago I told people I thought that we were going to fight to save America, I think it's broader than that. I think that we are in a fight to save the West. And I think that due to mass migration and, frankly, insane suicidal immigration and criminal justice policies, we are in a fight to save Western civilization. But I do think we save the West by saving America. And providentially, guys, I think that we can save America by saving Georgia. Control of the White House comes through Georgia. Control of the United States Senate comes through Georgia. How do we do that? I want to go back to where I started. It's about the American dream. If you look at the election of Zoran Memdani as the mayor of the financial capital of America, think about that. The mayor of the financial capital of America is a self-declared socialist. You know, back when I was in college, I used to accuse all my college professors of being closet commies, and they were, but they were closeted. They're not closeted anymore. They are openly saying we are for socialism. We hate free market capitalism, which ultimately means we hate individual liberty. It means putting the state over the right of the individual. But lest you think it's just New York, the week after Mamdani was elected, Seattle, Washington elected a Democrat socialist mayor of their own. But lest you think it's the crazies on the left coast or our friends in New England, across the hall from me in the Georgia General Assembly, in the State House, is a guy named Gabriel Sanchez. He was duly elected. His vote counts the same that my vote counts. He's a self-declared Democrat socialist. And y'all, they're running them all over the state, but they're especially running them in this area all the way up to my area. And I'm up in Forsyth County and coming. So, how does that happen? It happens because the middle class is disappearing. People can't afford gas, groceries, childcare, or property taxes. And so along comes a guy with crazy Bernie Sanders ideas who looks better and smiles while he talks. And he gets elected because he's talking about government grocery stores and rent control. And if you can't afford food and you can't afford rent, you are going to be susceptible to a Pied Piper that talks about those kinds of things. So we have to allow the middle class to reemerge. Right now, young people can't afford to buy homes and older people can't afford to stay in their homes. I think we have to take a sledgehammer to the property tax scam that exists in the state of Georgia. Principally, I do not believe that you should have to pay rent to the government to live in your own home. I certainly don't think you should have to pay more rent to the government this year than you did last year because your neighbor sold their house for more money. It's the only taxation on unrealized gain that exists anywhere in your life. And I think that it's especially insidious that you have to do that just to literally put a roof over your head. I also don't believe, guys, that when you turn 65 years old, that it's your job to pay for them to go to school anymore. It's my job to pay for them to go to school. I'm their father. So in Forsyth County, we got rid of property taxes for every single person over 65 years old. The bureaucrats and the educrats screamed bloody murder. You're going to bankrupt the school system. This is 20 years ago, by the way, this happened. This wasn't my doing. Do you know what county has the best school system in the state? The one that doesn't charge their seniors a dime in property taxes. Because ultimately, public education's outcome is not tied to how much money you spend in the classroom. Ultimately, it's tied to what happens in the home and the value that is placed on the education in the home. Because who walks into that classroom is far, far more important than how much money sits in that classroom. Georgia has the highest income tax in the entire Southeast. We're bordered to the north and the south by 2 states at 0. I believe that we need to get to 0. I believe that income taxes, I know that they're unconstitutional, but for the 16th Amendment. Does anybody know when income taxes became a thing in America? 1913. Anybody know when they became a thing in Georgia? 1929. Does anybody know the original income tax rate under Herbert Hoover in 1913? It ranged from 1% to 3%, and it was supposed to be temporary. The only worst thing Herbert Hoover left for America was the Federal Reserve. Both of those things should go away. But there are Georgians alive today who are older than our state income tax. See, when I start talking about these things, some people think it sounds radical. But the reality is that we have survived longer without income taxes as a nation and a state than we have with income taxes. We bring in $16 billion a year. So how do we offset that revenue? First and foremost, I think we put government on a diet. I think that the first budget I voted for 7 years ago was $24 billion. $24 billion. We're at $40 billion today. This is under Republican leadership, y'all. We can dial that back. But we have given away an incredible amount of money in tax carve-outs, tax credits, tax abatements to big corporations. I'll give you the example of one. It's going to make you mad. Back in 2018, Republicans voted to give data centers a 100% tax abatement. That is costing Georgians $1.5 billion a year. Do you know who gets that? Facebook, Amazon, and Google. Do you know how we pay for it? By taking 1 month of your income tax and giving it to Facebook, Amazon, and Google. In fact, $1.5 billion a year is more income tax than we bring in any given month in the state of Georgia. Do you know how many people in the Senate that are running for lieutenant governor voted against the data center tax credit? You're looking at them. You probably have people come here and talk about that all we got to do is get rid of these credits, the yacht credit, the data center tax credit. Well, they voted for all of them. I want the people in office not that can fix the problem, but don't put the problem into place in the first place. And that's a differentiating factor in this lieutenant governor's race. There's a reason why every single conservative scorecard, whether it's Turning Point USA, Club for Growth, CPAC, Georgia Republican Assembly, Freedom Caucus, has ranked me as the most conservative person running for lieutenant governor. It's because I'm not a shill for the Republican Party. I'm not a shill for the Democrat Party. I am a shill, though, for constitutional principles. And there is no constitutional principle that says it's the role of government to help Mark Zuckerberg build a data center. It's an absurd public policy. It also, by the way, is the reason you've had 6 power rate increases in the last 3 years that has raised the average power bill of the average Georgia family by $480 a year. These decisions matter. I'm going to talk about 2 more things, and then I'll be happy to answer questions. I want to talk about election integrity, because back in 2020, there were 4 of us in the Georgia State Senate who stood up after the election and called for a special session of the General Assembly. A guy named William Ligon, a guy named Burt Jones, a guy named Brandon Beach, and myself. And we were put in exile by leadership because they bought into the lie that the 2020 election was the most secure election in American history. They never tell you the metric by which they use to make that pronunciation. They just speak it as if it's true. But it's not true. And I can give you chapter and verse as to why it's not true. If you want to go there, save that question for later if you want. But let me look forward. We should not be voting on Dominion machines. We're the only state in the union that is voting on Dominion machines statewide. 2/3 of Americans vote on a hand-marked paper ballot. When we talk about getting rid of the Dominion machines, the media likes to pretend like we're crazy. And all that I'm saying is I want to take Georgia from being the only state that does it the way that we do it and go to the way that a majority of Americans do it. I do not believe in no excuse absentee voting, meaning that any Georgian can just vote by mail. I believe that our military, our elderly, people that have to travel for work should be able to vote by mail, but I believe the predominant voting methodology should be walking into a polling place, showing a photo ID, and being given a ballot. Why? Because it's the most secure way that we can vote. Last thing I want to talk about, and I've come under criticism for this, and you talked about the commercial. I've come under criticism for this from Republicans and Democrats. But when I talk about saving Western civilization, it is rooted in the reality that not all cultures are created equal, and not all countries are created equal. And in modern day America, it's almost uncomfortable to say, but it's true. When I was traveling the world with Chris Tomlin, I got to see a lot of countries. I got to go to the Far East. I got to go to Europe. We were South America, Africa, you name it. I've been there with the exception of China. All countries are not the same. And all cultures not the same. This place is very, very special and very unique. This year I introduced a bill in the Georgia General Assembly to ban Sharia law in Georgia, because Sharia law does not comport with the United States Constitution. And we cannot allow principles, ideologies, or legal systems that do not comport with the United States Constitution to exist in Georgia. And let me tell you what's happening outside of Dallas, Texas. There's an Islamic tribunal outside of Dallas, Texas. You can Google it right now. And this is a place where you can choose to step outside of the American court system, and you can go into quasi-arbitration. And they have a constitution of sorts at the Islamic tribunal. They have principles that they use to adjudicate their cases, and they adjudicate their cases in Texas by Sharia law. They use foreign contracts, if the foreign contracts exist, and then they certainly use the foreign principles. Part of what my bill would do if we pass it would be to ban Sharia tribunals, or frankly any other foreign law tribunal, from existing in the state of Georgia. We cannot allow a parallel legal system to exist outside of our court system where these kinds of things are happening, because that is where you get a foothold. And if you've been to London lately, you recognize that London is unrecognizable from what it was 30 years ago. And it is okay to say that we don't want that in America. We don't have to hide under our desk and pretend that there is no distinction between America and the third world. There is a distinction, and we have to protect it and preserve it. So the last thing I'll say, I'll describe for y'all is what the lieutenant governor does, because nobody knows what the lieutenant governor does. Let's just be honest, that's fine. Most people think the lieutenant governor shakes the governor's hand to see if it's still warm. Some of you wives can explain that to your husbands on the way home. But the reality is the lieutenant governor presides over the state senate. And it's not just a symbolic role of presiding over the state senate. It is an active role of shepherding legislation, slowing things down and speeding things up. And I've served under 2 lieutenant governors. Jeff Duncan, groan, that's your cue to groan, and Burt Jones. And the bills that I told you about, the Riley Gaines Act, the Georgia Promise Scholarship Act, you don't move those bills through a state senate without a strong lieutenant governor. And if we want to continue the momentum that we have had, specifically in the Senate, which those of you that follow politics, Phil can tell you this, the state Senate has been objectively the more conservative of the 2 chambers. But there's ultimately only 3 people that really matter in state level politics: the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the Speaker of the House. And if you can form a strong 3-legged stool with those men and women that occupy those 3 offices, in 8 years, we won't be wondering, why do they call Florida the free state of Florida? And we feel like we're getting table scraps, right? In 8 years, they can call Georgia the free state of Georgia. Does anybody know how much, what the margin of victory was for Brian Kemp 8 years ago, ballpark? It was 45,000 votes. Does anyone know what the margin of victory was for Ron DeSantis 8 years ago? It was 18,000 votes, about 1/3 of the margin of victory. Florida was a purple state too. But Ron DeSantis has turned that into a red state by putting free market principles and a love for country and a boldness on display that has been very, very, very unique. The man went to war with Mickey Mouse and Disney and Florida and won. No political consultant says to do that. But you do that if you have a core ideology and a backbone that says, I'm willing to fight for what is right. So I believe that that's going to be my marker of success. That's how I'm measuring myself, is that if we start to steal Florida's thunder a little bit, and rather than us looking at them and trying to say, let's do what Florida's doing, Florida starts to look at us, or somebody starts to look at us and say, let's do what Georgia's doing. And they did that on COVID. Governor Kemp did an amazing job leading on COVID. And they did look at Georgia in that regard. And what happened in the re-election for Governor Kemp? He won by 45,000 votes. He won re-elect by 300,000. Why? For one reason and one reason only. Because of what he did during COVID. People reward boldness, y'all. So my name's Greg Dolezal. My kids, I think, ran around and gave you all a flyer. I'd be honored to have your support and your vote. And Brenda, I'm happy to answer any questions. And
Okay,
you tell me when I'm out of time.
Excuse me, we're going to get a seat here. Sorry.
Y'all, how about Brad Carver being a trooper and rolling in? While they're getting him settled, I would tell you, when I had a bill this year in the Senate that we passed to ban the Dominion machines. It died in the House. But Brad actively, like I say actively, he was in the hallway lobbying members of the Senate to help us get the votes. That bill failed on crossover day, and we brought it back like 6 days later, and we got every single Republican to vote for it. And a big, big reason for that was Brad. So why don't you all give him a round of applause.
I appreciate this man very much. You carried the torch for us in a very strong way. So I just appreciate all you do for election integrity and holding Fulton County accountable. So I appreciate it every day.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? Ma'am.
Well,
Feel free.
without the mic.
Without the mic. All right. I'll paraphrase.
No, I do want to thank you. I watched you, I sat in some committee meetings, and while you were defending something on the floor, and you did it beautifully, even when you were being attacked. So I want to thank you for what you're standing for. I'm very concerned about the American Laws for American Courts bill, and want to know, I feel like as long as we present it as a Sharia law, instead of, we have problems with Chinese, the Chinese picking their people up and having special courts for them. We've got problems with judges all over the U.S. using international law that is, comes from the air. And so, can we rephrase the way we say it?
I'm not going to rephrase it in rooms like this, but if you notice when I presented the bill, I never once said Sharia law. So when we brought the bill to committee, it was all about the high-level principle.
Right.
And I think that that's actually what we need the ability to do, which is to understand framing. So if I were to walk in here and say I'm for American laws, for American courts, nobody's going to have any clue what I'm talking about. When I say Sharia law, people nod their heads. When I walk into a committee meeting, I'm leading with the high-level principle of we need to have American laws for American courts. And the Democrats all still vote against it, even in that framing. So I would just tell you that ultimately our framing, I don't think really matters as it relates to the other side. The reason I'm talking about it in these terms with this group is we have to have Republicans that come behind the bill. And the way that we're going to have Republicans come behind the bill is if 40 of y'all walk out of this room and say, I want that bill passed, and you call your state senator and your state representative, and this is the attempt to build the groundswell to move the needle on the bill. That's a great question. Thank you so much.
Do we have good Republican support for that?
I think that honestly, most Republicans, I shouldn't say most. There are some Republicans who do not feel comfortable talking about Sharia. They don't know what it is. They would say things like diversity is our strength, which it's not. Unity is our strength. There's nothing inherently noble about diversity if there's no cohesion. And so we have to have a cohesive culture. I would tell you that I don't think that most people have thought about the issue. I don't think that most people at state level, we don't spend a lot of time dealing with immigration. So people probably can't articulate a worldview around the reality that the American immigration system exists for one reason and one reason only, and that's to make life better for the Americans. It is not to make life better for Russia, China, Venezuela, Cuba, go down the list of countries. And so we do not, President Trump was correct in his first term. It's not the first time that we've paused immigration in this country. We paused immigration in this country back in the 1920s as well. And we need to pause, not slow down, but we need to pause immigration and allow the deportations to happen and allow the cohesion to happen, because the social contract with immigrants has been twofold. First and foremost, traditionally, if you go back to Ellis Island, two ideas. You're not going to be a burden to the American people. Welfare didn't exist back then, so the idea that you would come here and get welfare is a foreign concept. But the idea is that you will come here and help produce. But secondly, that you come here and become American. Not a hyphenated American, not an American who, identifies more with your home country than you do this country, but an American who wants to achieve that cohesion and become fully American. And that has not been the immigration story of the last decade. The immigration story of the last decade has been an eye towards conquest by some cultures that want to move here and replace Americans, and we can't allow that to happen. So thank you, sir.
Great.
So, one, Abbott, I think, squashed that Muslim uprising, that group that you talked about. Why don't you briefly describe your agenda, how you're going to accomplish your agenda? Because you said you talked about it, but you didn't describe how you accomplish it.
Yeah, so it's a great question. The state Senate's 56 people. I have led teams from 50 to 100 people for the last 20 years, whether that's my business, whether that's touring life. For some of my friends who are running for lieutenant governor, this would be the largest thing that they've ever done. And I think that you have to, strength in leadership in these roles matter. I come back to Jeff Duncan versus Burt Jones and just the difference that I saw. Jeff had zero relational equity with anybody in the Senate. Never spent time with them, never came to caucus. Remember, he had come out of the House. He was a state House member before, so he didn't know a single Senate member. I even encouraged him, because Jeff was my constituent. He lives in Forsyth County. I'm like, Jeff, you played college baseball. You played professional baseball. Like, this is just one big locker room in a lot of ways. Go hang with the guys and get to know them. Ask them how their family's doing. And he wouldn't do it. Burt, on the other hand, it has been the exact opposite, where he has the trust, the relational equity, and frankly, is willing to give air cover to members. So I recognize that I'm probably a little further to the right than some members are. But I believe that part of my role as Lieutenant Governor will be to articulate the principles in a way that allows them to come behind them and be comfortable talking about them back home. And being able to handle the media, set the agenda with the media, but then also going straight to the people. Because I don't think you have to go through the legacy media in 2026 to communicate to the people. And so Brad was talking about my work with Fulton County, whether that's the time that I drove around Fulton County and showed all of the illegal voting locations that you have here, or whether it was going toe with Fonnie Willis when everybody else was too afraid to do it, and said that we should just let the court system handle it. I think that people respond to that bold leadership. I think the harder thing than working the Senate, frankly, is going to be working with the House, not that, because the culture at the Capitol, and Phil knows this and Brad knows this, has been the House and Senate tend to compete, right? I'll give you an example. We passed the Riley-Gaines Act out of the Senate. It wasn't even called the Riley-Gaines Act at the time. And then what happened? Did the House pick up our bill and run with it? No, the House passed their own women's sports bill and tried to run it so that it'd be a House bill, not a Senate bill. You see, when I drop a bill, it's called an SB, and it's numbered, right? So SB 202, right? Or House Bill 101, right? Or House Bill 19, whatever. None of y'all know any of that. And you shouldn't, and you don't need to, and it's the craziest thing that we fight over at the Capitol. What you do know is that we're Republicans. And Republicans control the state. And we're either getting things done or we're not. And so part of what I think we have to do, this is a way that I would love to see the next governor lead, would be to pull the House leadership, so the Speaker, the Lieutenant Governor, and the Governor together, identify the 8 priorities for the year, the 12, whatever the number is. Hey, we're going to lower the income tax rate. We're going to ensure that data centers pay their fair share of power capacity expansion. We're going to work on eliminating property taxes. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. All right, House, you're taking 5 of these bills. Senate, you're taking 5 of these bills. We're going to pass them in the first 20 days. We're going to announce this as a contract with Georgia, and we're going to spend the last 20 days honing in on the budget. Because our budget process is something that, frankly, far too few of our elected officials understand. Our budget is bloated. We do not do zero-based budgeting. So that means all that we look at every year is what we add to the budget. And then the next year, the things that we added are just automatically in the budget for the following year. We never crack open what's called the base budget. Because frankly, the way that the chambers run, there's not enough time. And I want to create margin and time to do that. That's a really long, probably far too wonky answer to your question, but it's the vision that I see for how we move forward. Thank you for your question.
Great. First of all, your bill was terrific, and it's just dreadful that it didn't make crossover day.
I agree.
So that was.
I agree with both. Especially the first half. I'm kidding.
But my question is, I think the ruling was on Thursday, where the Supreme Court essentially viewed the 1965 Voting Rights Act in a different way, and now all the maps need to be redrawn, particularly across the South. So, from what I understand, Trump said he was going to, not Trump,
Governor Kemp.
our governor was going to analyze it, and then he came out with a hard no on Friday that he's not going to do anything about it because our primaries have already started.
Yeah.
Well, if we go ahead and run the primaries with a map that has been called unconstitutional without a special session to kind of review where we are with those boundaries, I think it'll cause all kind of lawsuits forever. So what is your thinking about this really important issue, and how many seats could the Republicans pick up if we actually redraw the congressional lines?
Yep. Y'all know high level what he's talking about. Let me, if y'all heard the question, but let me tell you what happened in Georgia because it frames it, I think, perfectly. So Louisiana was the court case, and Louisiana's map has been deemed unconstitutional. The precedent seemingly would deem Georgia's map unconstitutional as well, but Georgia's map has not been deemed unconstitutional. The court only answered the Louisiana map question. Now, that being said, when we redistricted just a couple years ago, and I was on the committee that was part of that process, we drew maps, we voted on the maps, we passed them, the governor signed them, the Democrats sued. That's like the cadence in every state, by the way. And Judge Jones came back, 11th Circuit, came back and said, y'all need to redraw your maps, and you need to draw at least, and it was different in the House or Senate, we had to redraw more what they call majority-minority districts. So the way that you draw majority-minority districts is you look at people solely through the lens of race, right? By definition, that's how you draw majority-minority districts. You say, I'm not going to look at county lines, state lines, tributaries, communities of interest, any of the things you would typically look at in redistricting. The thing that we are going to look at is race. And that's what the Alito opinion last week deconstructed brilliantly, if you look at it. And so I believe the maps that we have are unconstitutional, even though they haven't been deemed officially unconstitutional. I believe that we should go into a special session, and I believe that we should draw constitutional maps. I believe that if you look at least one congressional seat in Georgia, you probably have one congressional seat that is unconstitutional. You may have more. I would need to get into the numbers and dig through it. But here's what I would tell you is equally important. We know that we have state House and state Senate seats that we were forced to draw that were majority-minority districts. And that number is probably more than one. In fact, it is more than one. Why is that significant, and why is it important that even though the governor put the kibosh on 26, we should still go into a special session to draw the maps for 2028. Why? Because it will determine the next zone of redistricting after the 2030 census. And so if we fix the maps and make them constitutional for 2028, we will ensure that we have proper representation 2028 moving forward, not just congressionally, but in your state House and your state Senate as well. And that has a significant impact if we look forward. The next thing that the Supreme Court needs to work on, well, there's a couple things they need to work on, but is the counting of illegal aliens in the census. I would like to see that fixed before the next census. Is that if that is fixed before the next sentence, in conjunction with this, you will see a significant amount of more fairness returning to congressional races, because right now illegals are counting, and California probably has 3 seats that they shouldn't have. Y'all want to know what else we should change, by the way, the Supreme Court? 2 quick things. Birthright citizenship. Birthright citizenship, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, that was in the 15th Amendment, it does not envision a Chinese couple getting on a plane, flying to America, pushing out a baby, and then all of a sudden they fly back home with that baby, but that baby is an American Chinese citizen, can vote in our elections. That is absurd and asinine. The only thing perhaps more absurd and asinine is that there's a Supreme Court case from the 1960s that requires us to provide a public education to the children of illegal immigrants, even if the children are not United States citizens. So if you walk across the Rio Grande and you go somehow end up in an apartment in Texas, the Texas citizens are paying for your children to go to an American public school. If you're not mad enough yet, maybe that'll help. Thank you for your question. Yes, ma'am.
I have 2.
Yes, ma'am.
The first one is regarding your investment in the First Liberty Ponzi scheme. Did you have your money diverted to an Arizona company so that your name would not show up on the list of first investors who...
No, and I've never even heard that conspiracy theory before. Okay. So, okay, that's a new one.
Great. And the second one is about you saying here just now that the whole purpose of government is to support the individual liberties of citizens. And yet when I spoke to you specifically about my son's constitutional rights that were being violated by the ADA in Forsyth County, in Georgia, and all over the state, you told me that you would send it to the Senate that was in charge of education. Not only did you not, but I followed up with you twice and confronted you on X, and you lied to me. If you add that into the fact that you were mocking David Clark on X, and do not even say that this is just something that your staff did, because if you're going to be a leader, then your staff would know exactly what you stand for. This was a horrible abuse against those people with disabilities. It is shameful, and I am so upset with you.
Okay, let's go take it one by one. And I forget what the first one was, but I think it related to the conversation we had a year ago. I don't know how you know what I did and didn't talk to somebody in the Senate about, but as you know, there are committees of jurisdiction in the Senate. And after we got off of the phone, I made a phone call to the Committee of Jurisdiction in the Senate, had a conversation. I never saw your follow-up email. I have a team that I don't read every email that comes in through the Senate staff because there's hundreds of them that come in. So I never saw your email. I sent you on X my phone number and asked you to call me. You've not picked up the phone and called me.
I would love to see that, because I've got my ex. I haven't seen a number.
I'd be happy to show you right now.
Can we tone it down just a bit too?
You're Katie Asher, right?
Yes.
Hi, Katie. My cell is 404-915-1212. You want to look at that and just verify for the folks that I'm telling you the truth?
Is that a text to me?
That's a DM to you on X.
Okay, I don't have that.
Okay, so glad we could clear that up. If you look in your DMs on X, you'll probably see that.
Well, I didn't see.
And I responded to your X and said I sent you a DM. I believe I did that. That I can't swear by, but do you want to open your DMs and see if you see it? And as far as what my staffer did was reprehensible. When I woke up in the morning and saw that somebody from a fan account had tweeted out something poking fun at somebody else, I had the tweet removed. I called David to apologize. I set expectations with my staff, and I'm moving forward. I can't put the toothpaste back in the tube with what somebody did at 11 o'clock at night, but thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for your question. Sir?
Has Chinese-owned farmland in Georgia been discussed?
Yes, kind of. So we passed a bill last year to outlaw the sale of farmland to not just China, but all foreign adversaries within a certain radius of a military base. I think that it should be statewide because I think the threat is statewide. The threat is not just that they might use agriculture land to do surveillance at a military base. The threat is that they control. It's bad timing. The threat is that they control our food supply. China right now owns the bulk of Smithfield. Smithfield is the largest pork producer in the world. And so not only is China trying to buy land, but they're actually trying to control food production. And the control of food production obviously is a threat to national security. There's probably any other country, obviously we need to control it, but the last country that needs control of our food supply is China. Thank you for your question, even though you can't hear me.
It's somebody in the back. John's got one in the back.
In terms of restructuring the state tax,
State tax.
reworking the revenue for the state tax, how are you thinking about structuring it? Where would it come from? Does it come from income and does it come from property taxes?
On the state income tax? Yeah, so the quick numbers on that, we bring in $16 billion a year in income tax. We've got about $30 billion in credits, abatements, and the things that we don't tax. I would like to move to a fair tax system where we shift away from the taxation of income and we move towards the taxation of consumption. But bigger than that, we have to put a constitutional cap on state spending. Remember the 25 to 40 billion number I told you? The growth of the budget? If we had slowed that down, we would be able to go lower than we are right now in the income tax. I would remind you that for a lot of years, politicians were bragging that we bring in $16 billion, that we had $16 billion in undedicated reserves. They would call it a surplus. And it was like, well, we got the surplus. It's so great. Do you know what a surplus means? It means government took money out of your checking account and put it in their checking account, right? And the answer to the surplus is not to send equal refunds, which is what we've done. The answer to the surplus is to lower the rate for every single taxpayer so that we can begin to turn on the supercharged engine of economic investment. When you have the highest income tax in the region, in the Southeast, you're going to have decreased investment. Capital is going to flow quicker to Texas, Florida, and Tennessee if they're at 0 and we used to be at 6, now we're at 5.19.
But isn't a fair tax also an income tax?
No. A fair tax actually captures revenue from those who don't make money here in the state. So if you think about the World Cup that's coming here this summer, you're going to have a lot of people that could be paying tax, and they will pay tax in fairness. We do bring in 4 pennies on the dollar. But that's a way to broaden the base. what I didn't unpack in my previous answer is we also have to pull these tax credits back. We can reduce the income tax by 10% immediately if we get rid of the data center tax credit. We can go another 10% with the Hollywood tax credit. We can go another X% with the yacht tax credit. We can go another Y% with the cigarette manufacturing tax credit. There's hundreds of these tax credits that y'all don't even know exist because you don't have a lobbyist to get it done for you. And I think that the answer is that we have to be willing to tell. First of all, we have to recognize the Republican Party now, under President Trump, is the party of the working class. And we have to take our focus off of off of Wall Street and move our focus to Main Street. And that's a shift that the party is frankly late to the party on because we haven't adjusted as quickly to the realignment that's been happening politically under President Trump. Thank you for your question. 3 minutes. 3 minutes, all right.
Well, I got one more.
Let me go to, is there anybody that did not get a chance to answer a question? All right, round 2.
The QR code was out, the QR code was, is outlawed as of July 1st. You know more about election integrity than just about anybody else. So what is going to happen in Georgia because the legislature failed to do anything about restructuring our elections to be able to deal with that the Dominion machines probably need to be gone, but you tell me what you think is going to be the solution.
Yeah, it's not probably. The Dominion machines do need to be gone.
Thank you.
For multiple reasons. So there's a department that sits under the Department of Homeland Security at the federal level called CISA, C-I-S-A, Cyber Intelligence Security Administration. They have deemed Dominion software version 5.5A, which is the version that we're using. We're the only state using this statewide, to have 9 attack vectors that are vulnerable to attackers to hack. Now here's the interesting thing. They identified all those attack vectors. So if you are a nefarious actor, you have your blueprint now of what you need to do, right? They released that over 3 years ago. And the state of Georgia has done nothing. We haven't updated the software, haven't changed equipment, haven't done anything. So I think that, I don't know this to be a fact, but there is a collision course that we're on where we have to get rid of the QR codes by the November election, functionally. There's, it's by July 1st, technically, but functionally it's the November election. We passed a bill out of the Senate to get rid of the Dominion machines and move to a hand-marked paper ballot this year. The House passed a version to kind of do all of that, but to do it for 2028. And so we were just at an impasse with the House. So the Senate's position was this year, the House's position was, it was a January 1st, 28? Yeah, 27, but functionally for the 28 election. So we were just at an impasse there. I don't know what's going to happen. The state election board is having active conversations on that. The governor has come out and said that he and his team are looking at. You could see a super special session where we do that and redistricting. I don't know, but that could be possible.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.